Hello and welcome back to the Private Client Podcast. My name is Charlie Shammy. I'm an independent financial advisor and director of Glams IFA and co-founder of the Private Client Network. We're a networking organization aiming to bring together the various private client professions so we can all improve the service to our clients and grow our respective businesses. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to Tamara Hasson, partner in the Inheritance Trusts and Disputes team at Stephens Scown. Tamara, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to go in high level. So what is probate and why does it get contentious?
Yeah, two good questions. And one is sort of easier to answer than the other. So the easy one is, what is probate? It's really just the process for administering someone's estate. So gathering in their assets, paying off their liabilities, clearing any taxes that need to be paid and any expenses, and then distributing the estate to whoever's inherited it. And the contentious probate element is really if there's going to be an argument about who has inherited it, or in some cases, how that person has inherited it.
So hypothetically, you've got a financial advisory firm called Glams IFA, and if the founder were to leave it to someone's brother instead of them, there might be a cause for dispute, in which case we call you.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's not just about how a beneficiary sees what they should have inherited, or perhaps they're not a beneficiary and that's the problem. But also there can be problems with trusts that are going to be managing someone's inheritance when they wanted to receive it outright. And there can also be just all the disputes between executors, disputes between trustees, and everything in between. So it's basically summed up as someone's dead, there's a row.
Yeah, I promise, no, I don't ask technical questions, but I actually have one that's just occurred to me because it comes up a lot. In terms of the order of distribution, when someone passes away, does HMRC need to be paid first?
They're a priority creditor. So it's not that they have to be paid first in time for inheritance tax. You can pay some of the inheritance tax on certain assets over a 10-year period, for example. But woe betide the executor who distributes the estate and hasn't paid off the tax that's due first, because they are a priority creditor. Otherwise, everyone would just distribute the estate and HMRC would never get paid.
I see. I suppose it makes sense. I mean, ultimately the Treasury needs their cut, and if assets are distributed prior to them getting paid, there's a problem.
I think the difficulty is that executors are personally liable if they distribute when they shouldn't have, and HMRC would hold them to that personal liability. So no executor would choose to put themselves in the position, particularly if they aren't the party that's inherited the estate, to be paying out the tax on the estate while the beneficiaries have received the actual money. So a sensible executor would never put themselves in that position.
Yeah. When a client approaches you, do you guys have a process of sort of making them aware of their responsibilities, their personal responsibilities and potential liabilities sort of in their role? Or is that something that people come to you already knowing?
No, sadly not. I mean, it's a really big area. So we try not to give people a big lecture on every single right, duty, and responsibility of a trustee and executor, if that's the role they're in when they come to us. But they certainly do need to know their basic obligations, particularly when they're acting as executors. So if they're acting as executors in the dispute, they do need to act neutrally between the beneficiaries. They need to ensure that they are preserving the assets of the estate and that they're acting fairly between beneficiaries and honestly. So there's a whole load of rules that flow from that, but those are the basic principles.
So I guess it's not dissimilar to the responsibilities of trustees administering a trust, in that they have an obligation to act in accordance with what's been set out. I do wonder if some people miss that sometimes.
I I think it's a really difficult question, particularly if there's a discretionary trust, because I think a lot of trustees are wary about how wide that power is and whether they're going to make the right decision, which is quite, what's my right and your right might be someone else's absolutely abominable decision. And I think that's quite difficult for trustees to manage. I think also, though, there is a perception that as the executor, you have a lot of power, which you certainly do. But it's really important for all executors to recognise that they also have quite a lot of duties and responsibilities. And it's really important they do abide by those.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think on the trustee side, sorry, we're going slightly off piece. I think that's why a lot of trustees will often engage external advisors almost to give themselves some cover, as in I sought advice from firm X and something that backs up their decisions, I think.
Yeah, and that's a really reasonable thing to do. Why would an executor or a trustee put themselves at risk of personal liability when they don't need to do that and they can recover the expenses that they incur taking that advice? So it's a bit of a no-brainer, really, but um, you can't force people to take that advice, but definitely it's a good idea when you're unsure about a legal problem or a tax problem or a financial problem to go and get that appropriate advice at that point, because it just saves a lot of time later on.
Yeah, I agree. I've done what I often do, which is launch straight into work when I have the intention of knowing a little bit more about you. So, as I said in the intro, you're a partner at Stephens Scone, sorry. And but on your side, if we were sort of rewind the clock back, sort of start of the career, like did you always want to be a solicitor? Was that something you had in your head from an early age? And could you sort of give us a little bit
Wow.
of, I don't know, your
Yeah.
story, I guess, from how you got to where you are now?
So I had a fantastical ideas about becoming a solicitor. And it really, I sort of like, strangely, quite a lot of solicitors. I wasn't sure whether I was to be a solicitor or a vet. And I have no idea, but it turns out there's quite a few of us out there who made that choice.
Yeah.
And so I
Really?
wasn't really,
Is this
yeah.
like a niche subgroup?
Well, all I'm saying is there was a revelation at the Stephens Scone Christmas party this year as everyone came in fancy dress as the career that they wanted to have before they became a lawyer, and there was a
Oh,
lot of
brilliant.
vets present. So it turns out, yeah, it's quite, quite maybe it's just at
So did
Stephens
everyone turn
Scone,
up
but
in vet outfits? Is that what
there were
happened?
quite a few vets. Yes,
Oh, brilliant.
surprisingly large number of vets turned up. Um, so I was choosing between the two, but when I was 18, along with every other 18-year-old that ever existed, I did know everything. So luckily, I just thought, well, I know I could be a lawyer, but I think I'll
Yeah.
just go and be a journalist for a bit. And so I went into media and I worked for various news organizations and publishing houses and, TV companies, and did quite a few different projects. And then I thought, wow, I sort of got to about 28 and thought, I don't think I can mess around like this for infinitely. And I was offered a contract at News International, at News of the World, which has
Oh,
now gone
wow.
bust. And I thought, actually, I don't want to do that. I think I'm really good at the bit where I talk with people and find out what's going on. But I think I'd like to do something more constructive with it. So maybe now is the moment to finally do that career in law that I'd been planning on for a while, but kind of when I was 18, I couldn't stand the idea of more academia. So
Yeah.
I kind of went away and mucked around for about 10 years. And it was a good thing to do. I don't regret it at all. But when I was 28, I was sort of in a position that I could put myself through university. So that's what I did. Um, and it was hard. I was working as a journalist as well as, having quite big other commitments outside university. And I put myself through my degree, came out the other side, and then thought, oh, great, now I'm going to immediately be snapped up
Yeah.
by an enormous, enormous behemoth of an international company, and they're going to immediately pay me, I think, about £500,000 or £600,000 a year. It's just going to be great.
Obviously. Are you
Obviously,
saying that didn't happen?
do you know, reader, it didn't. And I think I had a completely, I suppose, like a lot of people's idea of what happens in the professions, I had a completely sort of unrealistic idea about what the reality was of law quite a lot of the time. And so, in actual fact, I then looked around for a training contract and went to a very small high street firm with two partners. And when I sort of talk to trainees now about seats and so on, I mean, at this firm, the seats were litigation and not litigation.
Okay.
And so, so you were
Brilliant.
sort of doing, private client followed by a bit of family law, followed by a neighbour dispute, bit of corporate stuff, perhaps a bit of conveyancing in the afternoon,
So a bit
few
like Suits,
leases.
you just do a little bit of everything.
It was exactly like slightly less glamorous, but yeah, it was exactly like Suits. And so that was my first experience of going into law. And although it was in some ways a bit chaotic because you didn't see things from beginning, middle, and end. You were sort of picking up and putting things down a lot. And so in terms of learning one area of the law, I had to move on to do that. But actually, in terms of understanding clients and understanding what they're hoping for from you and what you can and can't do for them, it was a brilliant way to start. So I have no regrets, although I think in hindsight probably there were some scary attendance notes on some of those files.
Yeah, probably. But then, we've all got to start doing something. So if you were doing such a broad mix, at what point did you sort of s- specialize in private client work?
So I transferred my training contract just because geographically I needed to move. And I joined a firm who were looking for a private client lawyer. And it was fantastic. They're gone now, but I joined Leo Absey and Cohen in Cardiff. And it was a great firm to go and train at. Finished my training contract there, and I had sort of full access to all of the aspects of private client work. So not just wills or just estates, but court of protection work, contentious and non-contentious private clients. So it was a hodgepodge of everything. And it was really interesting. And I loved it. I loved the clients and I loved just the variety of life that you see as a private client practitioner. And that's really where I got into it. And I've been practicing ever since.
Yeah, it's such a nice point. And we were saying just before we hit record that, without being too corny about it, we in private client work, you really do get attached to your clients. I'm really lucky. I really like all my clients. I think they're a great bunch of people and just very, very much want to see things go well for them. And I don't know, I've not worked in the corporate side. Maybe you corporate solicitors feel the same about their corporate clients, but I suspect private client is a little bit unique in just how well you get to know the people as individuals and want things to go well for them.
I think that is true, and um, I suppose because in private client, very often, you're thinking about um, how people live their life and how well they live their life, how they want to live their life well. And that sounds a bit kind of like a kind of corny way of looking at it, but it's not, because that's the most critical thing in all of our lives. Like, are we doing what we want to do? Do we enjoy it? Are we surrounded by people we like and enjoy being with? And those are exactly the questions all of our clients are having to answer. So if I look at my career and say, well, what's the thing that I'm most proud of? Um, I was a deputy for somebody who had no capacity. She was reclusive and she hadn't had contact with her children at all.
Wow.
And she wouldn't let anybody into the house. And so it was very, very difficult to make sure that she was okay. We would sort of go and try and speak to her. She wouldn't answer the door. The only words heard her speak to me were "go away,"
Oh,
which
geez.
is not unreasonable, but it did make I did think, well, okay, well, she knows that she wants me to go away, so that's something.
Mm,
But it didn't really give me much of an insight into how she was. And in complicated circumstances, it became urgent for us to really get into the property. And so
so who
we
contacted you? Was it the children who got in contact with you?
um the yes, the children got in contact to say, we're really worried about mum and we can't get her to talk to us. She's completely withdrawn from the world. And so I actually took the deputyship over from someone else who was an existing deputy
I
for
see.
this lady. And because she had retreated so much, it was very difficult for us to make a capacity assessment. So we couldn't say, well, does she have capacity to decide not to see anybody or speak to anyone? Is it for us to intrude upon her life, whether she likes it or not? So these were really difficult questions that we had to look into together with the adult safeguarding unit as part of the social services team. And eventually, after sort of a big conversation with the family, with the social services team, and with the police, the decision was that we were going to break into the property. And that's what we did. And so we accessed the property because there was water escaping from the properties. We had to find out
Jeez.
if she was safe and if everything was okay, and then we just couldn't leave it. And so she was sectioned on that day, which was hard. It's a really difficult process to go through. Awful for her and undoubtedly terrifying. But it did mean that she could finally receive the care that she needed. And, for the first time started having hot meals, for example, hot drinks. She hadn't had any changes of clothes of any significance for a long time. She'd been living in a damp house, and she was too scared to put the heating on, for example.
Oh,
She'd got really worried about the electrical appliances and what they might mean to her, and that perhaps they were dangerous, as in they were going to attack her. And so she now lives in a very kind of warm, safe environment. And because she's now compliant with her meds, because there's someone to oversee that, she has a relationship with her children again and with her grandchildren. And I
oh,
think
wow.
it's those small things where you say, everyone, this is a hard decision to make, but we've got to make that decision and we can't leave it. We have to do something that could go wrong, that it might not be okay. But if we don't do it, we'll never know. And I really enjoy that aspect of my work, that idea that actually by doing something and being proactive, you've brought out a result for somebody where actually their life is better and their life with their family is better. And that's a big deal. That's important.
That's huge. And it's a really interesting example because, I think if you say the word sectioned to someone just sort of out of context, I think that would almost universally be seen as a bad thing, a negative thing. But if it can bring about such an improvement in that person's just day-to-day life and the life of their family, I mean, yeah, I'm sure that was a really rewarding outcome, especially again dealing with private clients. You get to see the outcomes of the things
Yeah.
you work on and the advice you give. It's not like it happens. I mean, depending on what you do, sometimes you might not see it, but a lot of the times you absolutely get to see the results of it and positive
Yeah.
improvements in people's lives. It's a really nice part of it.
I think it is um it depends what you like. And I don't think that there's a sort of right or wrong answer. I love what I do because I really am interested in people. I like knowing what's happening in their lives. I want to know um, if there's something we can do that's going to be helpful, that's going to make things better, even if that might mean, as in being sectioned, it gets worse temporarily first. Because, as you say, nobody would ever choose to be sectioned. It's an unpleasant experience, usually. It's not something that's you would choose. But actually, I think currently we're having big conversations in the UK about social care and how we look after people, the most vulnerable people in society. And we've got to start having those conversations about, well, what is the best way to look after them? And where is that appropriately done? And who's going to keep an eye on it? And are they going to be able to stay on top of that job? I think there's a lot of questions. Lack of funding's a big one. We're all living much longer than we used to. So there's just more people needing that social care. And and I think these are all fundamental questions. It sounds a bit pompous, but I think they are fundamental questions about
Yeah.
society and about what matters to all of us. What is going to happen to us if we fall ill, and are we looking out enough for each other? So yeah, it's a big area, but it's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah. So it is a huge area, but it is so important. When you're doing something like that, do you interact with other private client advisors, or does that come so in that case, or something similar? When do you pull in other advisors, or indeed when should other private client advisors think about contacting you for something similar?
Yeah, so on capacity issues,
Yeah.
I would say that the sooner you get started, the better. So if you are giving a vulnerable client advice on how to manage their finances, how to arrange things in the future, how to fund things like care or care packages at home, all of those kinds of things. Or even if you're advising someone and you're not quite sure if they've got capacity to make that decision, the sooner you get the quarter protection sort of mechanism in process, the better, because it's not a quick mechanism, and it does take time to make sure that you've got all of the information together. So I would say to anybody recommending in, the sooner the better. And if you just want to check in and say, well, do I need extra help with this? Do we need an extra power of attorney or an extra authority or some kind of extra piece of information? The sooner you ask that question, the better. On the flip side, I would say, from my point of view, um, it's invaluable. I could not do my job if I didn't have other professionals helping me. I've got absolutely no idea, and I would be dangerous, I was thinking, to
Oh, wow.
ask about how much money do I need, to fund this lifestyle? How am I going to do it? What's the most tax efficient way of doing it? Should I invest in this or that? I have no idea, and I don't pretend to have an idea. And I absolutely rely on other professionals to give answers to those questions. And equally, I kind of think you have to rely on actually people who can give you sensible property valuations. It's you don't work in a vacuum. Some of the best outcomes I've ever had have been where there has been a sort of super squad all talking to each other and saying, okay, how can we mitigate this risk? How can we produce this result? And what's the best way forward for this client that collectively we can come up together? I'm a big believer in the hive mind.
Yeah. I mean, on the odd occasions, because we typically refer on for specialist things. So powers of attorney comes up. It came up recently, and sometimes clients can feel a little bit odd about powers of attorney. But what I say is, if you were to lose capacity, I said someone's making a decision for you. All an LPA is doing means you choose who that person is, rather than it being someone that you may not know. But on the odd occasions, I actually get on sort of group calls with private client advisors with a client. It is nice, and I suppose it almost replicates like a mini family office with various different professions, sort of all advising in the client's best interest. And it is very good when that happens. It's why I
Yeah.
like doing networking with private client professionals, because you get to replicate it in a small way.
Yeah, and I think also what you see is slightly different. So most private clients will know their accountant much better than they would know their solicitor because they see them every year.
Yeah,
Whereas they might see us, every 5 or 6 years, maybe, depending how often they move house and how often they change things. And so an accountant or a financial advisor who check in regularly are going to have an absolute wealth of background information that we're not going to have.
yeah,
And they will have had far more conversations than we will have had at that point about, well, what are you worried about? What don't you want to happen? What is your primary goal in doing whatever it is that you're doing, what planning you're undertaking? And so I think that that's really different to the kind of advice we would give, where they might be being asked really hard questions about who are you willing to upset?
mm,
Is it okay with you if that person doesn't speak to you again? Particularly in contentious probate matters where you're saying, okay, here's the advice I'm going to give you about what your options are. But in taking that advice, you may well end up never speaking to that person again. Is that okay? And
that's
actually
not a
having
small question, is it?
it's not a small question, and it's probably the toughest bit of litigation. I mean, and everything in litigation is tough. I mean, you say to a client at the beginning of a matter, look, this is going to be slower than you hope. It's going to be more expensive than you want. And there's going to be an uncertain outcome. With the best will in the world, nobody can guarantee what's going to happen at the end of it. So you have to accept the consequences of that. You, the client, have to accept that if you get on the sled and start going down the hill, it's going to be difficult to get off without there being some consequences of one kind or another, whether that's just being incredibly stressed and distressed by the process, or because of the costs outcome, or because of the outcome generally, that actually you started this matter deciding whether to have the row or not, and now nobody's speaking to you, and they're probably not going to speak to you again from a
Yeah.
particular part of your family, and that's huge. And only the most um I would say probably only the most hardened person wouldn't give that some thought. It's a really tough call for people to make.
Do you get examples where you're not, say you're not representing the aggrieved party in a probate situation, you're maybe representing the sort of parties that were more favorably treated in a will? And will you give them guidance on to what extent the other person has got a claim and maybe go down like a settlement? Does that happen very often in contentious probate, or does it always
It,
go to court and there?
no, always you would always have that conversation of. I mean, I have to say, very, very few clients would say to you, I was favored unjustly. Um,
Yeah.
it's like, in the same way, very few clients would say, so and so didn't like me because I did something wrong. That's not how it works. And the ones who feel like that probably wouldn't litigate. They wouldn't come and see you because they would already, in their own mind, have made a decision. But
Yeah.
yeah, we would always say to a client, look, these are the pros and cons of the litigation as it's being presented. This is where we think your case is vulnerable. This is where we think your case is particularly strong. And so you have to create your theory of the case. At the beginning of the matter, you say, well, what is our case and what is our defense? And what's the best way of approaching that so we maximize our strengths and minimize our weaknesses? But absolutely, we would always say to a client, you don't have to do this. It is an option for you to say, I don't want this. I just don't want the row. I'll just give them whatever if they're asking for something, pretty reasonable, they might well say that. And in fact, I have been involved in cases which, of course, then are never litigated, where the person has said, look, I don't know why I was given that field or that particular
Yeah.
item that's valuable to that person, but not to me. And I'm not going to get into it. I'm just fine, let them have it. It just doesn't bother me. Or in one particular case, I remember two sisters um, who had inherited under an intestacy, saying, well, actually, we'd like to give a share of our inheritances each to our brother's best friend because he visited him throughout his last years when we couldn't, and we think he should be rewarded. And so, you know,
Wow.
for all of the people who do choose or do feel that they cannot reach an outcome without litigation, there are plenty of people who don't get involved with it and who reach a different solution. And we would always encourage people, if they can do that, to do that.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, it's good to hear. And I guess it's just an extension of working in the client's best interests in whatever form it takes, which is
It
always good to hear.
it is, but I mean, I ought to probably, I'm sounding slightly saintly on that one, but I should add that at the same time, if I think a client's got a really fantastic case and I think the other person is swinging the lead, then I would have no hesitation in saying to the client,
This is
don't settle it.
speculative.
Absolutely, don't shift an inch. Because, you know, just as there are really brilliant people out there who do the right thing, there are people out there who feel pretty entitled for not doing very much. And I would never recommend to a client that they gave ground to such a person.
Yeah. Yeah, which is important
Yeah.
too. Moving away slightly from the work side of things. Um, so you're a partner at Stephens Scown and at your previous law firm. Can you talk to me a little bit about that process, sort of progression in law? How does it work? And
Yes.
specifically about becoming partner, like, so for any sort of more junior lawyers that are listening or senior associates that are sort of knocking on the door, any can you tell us a little bit about that process for you and maybe any advice for people wanting to make that similar progression?
Yeah. So I think I think the big difference between being an associate and being a partner is when you're an associate, you have someone who you are looking upwards to help you solve a problem. Whereas as a partner, of course, it's for you to be the helping and being the problem solver.
Yeah.
And so it is that shift between looking at something and thinking that's not quite right. Gosh, I hope someone fixes it. And looking at something and thinking, well, that's not quite right. Looks like it's probably partly
I
my
think I
job
can
to go
fix
and
it.
fix that. Yeah, I better go and see if I can fix it. And so I think that that's ultimately the big difference. In terms of career progression,
Sorry, just on
um,
that point there,
sorry.
that's a really interesting answer because I've asked this question a few times, and I thought you were going to talk about the client acquisition side of the transition
Ah,
rather than the technical. But I think you're 100% right because I sort of anecdotally, a friend of mine who's recently made that transition, talking about his subordinates and his juniors that are pushing for promotion and pay rises and stuff. And he was sort of saying to me, the problem is every problem they have, they come to me still. And he was basically talking about you need to be able to lean on your associates to help with the burden of challenges that happen. He's like, and in his example, he was just saying they're just not every tricky thing is coming back to me. Every problem's coming back to me. So he's sort of pushing back on them and saying,
yeah,
much like you just did, you need to, instead of being the problem highlighter, you need to be the person solving it.
I think that's true. I mean, and I think it's a really tricky balance. So, um, unless you're a complete sociopath, when you become a partner, you actually want to be good at it.
Yeah.
And you want people to think, oh yeah, they're good at their job. And so you are very inclined also, I think, to be a problem solver and say, I'm gonna, don't worry, leave your problems with me and I'm gonna try and get that dealt with. And I think it's right to say to people who want to progress, look, progression is a two-way street. And so you will get a change in title. Usually, there's a change in financing, but that comes with a lot of responsibility and obligation to try and make sure that you're looking after the firm that you've become a partner at, and that means looking after the people you work with, and generally not looking at anything and saying, well, that's someone else's problem. You really have to look at things and say, is that something I can sort of put my shoulder to the wheel on? In terms of getting promoted, I think that that has changed a lot. Um, Certainly, the emphasis on business development is enormous, but also how that business development is done is really different. And so um, I tend to get quite a lot of work from other professionals and from other solicitors. And I think that's partly because if you're around for long enough, you eventually meet lots of people. And if you treat other people how you would want to be treated, then as a general rule, um, you're going to be able to do business together. Even if you've been on opposite sides on a matter, you should still be able to have a conversation later on about anything that was difficult or knotty that you had to undo. And I think that building that network so that you are supporting others and they are supporting you is quite a big progression point from junior to senior. That's one of the big things that we do. I mean, that doesn't mean, you don't have to love everyone and everyone doesn't have to love you, but you have to be
I think it
building
does
that.
mean that.
Well, it's obviously
No, it
ideal
doesn't.
if
Of
they
course not.
do, but you can only do your best. Everyone isn't going to think you're great, um, un- unbelievably, but
Yeah.
that is true.
Temerity.
Yeah, you can't win them all, but I think that that is something that is really important for juniors to sort of recognise and start doing. And I think that social media has changed so much during my career time, and how we present ourselves as a brand and how we present ourselves as a personal brand and as part of our firm's branding are all things that we all need to keep an eye on and develop so that you're delivering a kind of on message, but also authentic
Yeah, there's
picture
the
of the
balance
kind of
right there.
person you are to deal with. Yeah, it's
And how does Stephens Scown, how do you guys deal with it? It's to take LinkedIn, for example, will
yeah.
you, does everyone have kind of a free hand, tell your associates go nuts, shout about what you're doing, or
Right, I
are you a
mean,
little bit more? I think it's difficult
within
because you
reason.
need to be careful. There's certain rules that, I mean, it comes up in our world a lot, because if you stray into what the regulator would deem financial promotion, a whole ream of rules come in about disclaimers and warnings that you need to mention, and rightfully so. So it's trying to, in our world, it's staying the right side of that line of talking
Yeah.
generics, making factual statements, but at no point promoting specific products or investments. Is there a similar
Yeah,
dynamic in your world?
it is. I mean, lawyers generally are not are not likely to stray into those realms, not least because we can't reveal who our clients are. So
Yeah.
we can't really be talking about what we're doing in an identifying way. And so in that sense, we're not too prescriptive with how people interact with LinkedIn. However, of course, like every law firm, we have particular aspects of ourselves that we're proud of. So we're an employee-owned law firm. That is something that we talk about and which we are proud of, and which I
That is
think is
unusual.
it is and it is, I think, one of the great strengths of the firm. And so in the last round of bonuses, every single employee got the same bonus. As long as you qualified for the bonus because you'd been there for long enough, the usual thing that you have to be there for the full financial year, then you are going to get the same bonus, whether you are, in the reception team or whether you are a lawyer or
Is that in
wherever you're.
percentage terms or monetary terms?
Monetary terms, it's a
Oh,
lump
wow.
sum. Because it's our profit share and everyone has an equal share in the profit.
Wow.
Um, so how it works is, I mean, yes, it's not every single bit of the profit is paid to all the employees, but the share that goes to the employees is evenly divided amongst us all. And I think that really promotes great teamwork. It means that it's just as important for the person trying to get you to answer your phone as it is to you answering your phone to pick it up and look after that person who's trying to get in touch with you. Everyone's equally invested, and it shows, and it shows well. And so I think that that's something that is really important to the firm, and it's something we shout about. We do talk a lot about our B Corp B Corp accreditation, which is
It's a big
again
one.
it is a big one, and I think that what I really like about B Corp is it's not a bit of greenwashing. It is something that the expectation is that you are doing something active to put forward the importance of people, profits, and planet, and balancing the three of them so that you are looking after all of those aspects of your business. And I think that's important. I think it meshes really well with the employee ownership. So yeah, we do talk about that, and we do try and show that we're not just talking about it, but we're doing it. We're actually going out there and doing community days. We are doing things that help other people to promote either charities or beach cleans or, any of the other things that we do. We support sort of local school projects, that kind of thing. We're really keen to get involved with that because we don't believe in just giving it lip service. We actually want to do it.
Yeah, that's really good. We're not, we've looked in, we started the process of looking into it. I'd put us in the bracket of be curious, rather than taking a dive. But yeah, we've heard from a lot of people that it's so beneficial, it's really worthwhile, but also it's quite an endeavor doing the application process. That'll probably maybe be on my 2026 goals.
I would say so. I'm not involved in the application process, but yeah, I understand it is quite lengthy. But I think if you're serious about the things that B Corp is serious about, actually it will come naturally, and there's a lot of support out there. So as we became accredited, we had support from other B Corp businesses, and we now offer that support to people who want to become accredited if they're sort of not sure about an aspect of it or they want to chat about it. We're really happy to do that because we believe in it. We think it's something that's helpful for everybody. And I also think that, in a purely business sense, it's a way of saying to clients, look, our views of the community and our views of how we want to sort of occupy our shared space on the planet hopefully align with yours. And I think, bearing in mind the number of businesses, particularly in the Southwest at the moment, who are, interested in, regenerating energy and all of those kind of saving resources and recycling and all of those kinds of ways of having a greener planet, actually it's important that our views align with that.
Really good. No, I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting. It sounds like you guys are up to a lot of interesting stuff, and everything about quarter protection and attorneys. It's something that I think definitely in the financial advice world we always need. help with, because it's not our area of expertise. So really appreciate all the insights.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been really good fun.
No problem at all. Catch up with you soon.
Take care.